Good morning, class. It's my pleasure to be here to continue our series of lectures on defense and strategy in the 20th century. Today, we'll begin our lectures on concepts in defense and strategy in the 20th century. I will be talking about alliances and deterrence. Alliances and deterrence. Both concepts are not new. They've been part of defense and strategy from time immemorial. However, they assume new significance in the 20th century because of the dramatic change in the nature of defense and strategy in the 20th century, particularly after the invention of nuclear armament and the reconfiguration of defense and strategic thought after the Second World War. So we'll be talking about alliances and deterrence. What is an alliance? Alliance, simply put, in strategy, is the coming together of two or more countries in the face of the perception of a common threat to a mutual interest which they cannot individually protect on their own, or in anticipation of some advantages which they cannot enjoy on their own, but which they think by pulling their resources together they will reap. Alliances come in various forms and for various purposes. You have peacetime alliances, you have wartime alliances. But in the context of strategy, alliances is simply the coming together of two or more countries in the face of uh, a perceived threat to a common interest, which individually they cannot address. Alliances have conditions under which they come into being and under which they go into operation. One major consideration is that there is perception of a common threat to a common interest which members of the alliance cannot individually protect, and which they think that by coming together they will be able to better protect. In other words, federate or coordinate their capabilities to be able to tackle a common threat. Alliances, as I've said, are not new in defense and strategy in particular, and international relations in general. It's been part of relations among states and nation states in the international system from time immemorial. But particularly from the late 18th century and right through the early 19th century, alliances came to play a very significant role in international relations. From the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789, France became the preponderant power in Europe. And with the career of Napoleon, the international relations of Europe was reconfigured in such a way that nearly all the powers in Europe were either under the direct authority or indirect influence of France. And so European states felt this was not a good situation to be. And they formed a series of alliances, which in European history they refer to as coalitions, to make sure that France and Napoleonic preponderance was jettisoned, and the order in which there was a balance of power was restored in international relations in Europe. On and off, Britain formed the nucleus of this alliance, and after the Battle of Waterloo, France was successfully defeated, and the principle of balance of power, which had been the basis on which European states interacted from 1648, was restored. The alliances of the 19th century were to ensure the balance of power, that no single power, in this instance France, was strong enough to be able to dominate the international system. And the alliances inaugurated what is referred to in European history and international relations as the concert of Europe. And this was able to deter aggression, to deter attack by a strong power and was able to maintain peace and security in Europe and international relations for close to a period of 100 years. After the Second World War, when the nuclear weapon was invented and they demonstrated its lethality, initially the United States had a monopoly of this weapon. But from 1949 and 1950, the defunct Soviet Union invented it. Even without the uh, nuclear weapon, the Soviet Union had the largest army in Europe. And so there was the fear among all European states that at a particular time the Soviet Union might entertain imperialistic or ideological expansionistic policy towards the other European countries. And so they decided to come together under the protection of the United States of America. This was what led to the establishment of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. Alliances are expected to convey some advantages, just as they are also expected to bring in some sacrifices. Uh, a writer in international relations has described alliances as a form of marriage, with all the problems of compatibility and incompatibility, friction, and disagreements. However, the exigencies of the overriding interests which members of the alliance wish to protect make them to sink their differences to to accommodate the issues of incompatibility among themselves in order to protect these common interests. At the end of the Second World War, all European states saw that they would not be able to stand up to the Soviet Union, and so joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, under the leadership of the United States of America. Alliances come into operation under what is called the casus foederis, that is, the conditions that must be obtained before the alliances could be activated. The alliance could be activated. In the case of NATO, this was the famous Article 5 of NATO, whereby it is expressly indicated that an attack on any member of NATO will be seen as an attack on all members of NATO and will therefore invite corresponding response from all members of NATO to tackle such an attack. This was the casus foederis of NATO, which still stays in operation up to today. NATO, of course, provoked a similar alliance by the Soviet Union, which, after inventing the nuclear power, also served as an umbrella to protect countries of Eastern Europe and those that adhered to its ideology. And so in 1955, the Soviet Union inaugurated the Warsaw Pact, which was a similar alliance to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So alliances pool the resources, pool the power of federating or allying members together in the face of a common threat uh, to a common interest which they cannot individually protect. Throughout most of the 19th century, these two alliances, that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the Warsaw Pact, served as rival alliances among the powerful states in international relations. So alliances are a powerful instrument in strategy for nations to be able to achieve their goal. As I have said in our previous class, national interest is what motivates nations to go into relations with other nations in international relations. National interests are categorized into primary, secondary, and tertiary. The primary national interest in international relations is taken to mean the defense of the territorial integrity of any state, and the protection of its sovereignty. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization guaranteed this for members of the alliance in the same way as the Warsaw Pact did the same for members of the alliance. Alliances have their advantages and also their disadvantages. One of the advantages is the extension of the power capacity of member states. By joining the strength of all members together, individual member states join their forces, and this serves as a restraint when we discuss deterrence later, as a restraint on would-be aggressors or would-be antagonists or enemies in the international system. Alliances also bring in other advantages. In some places, uh, the members benefit from exchange of uh, ideas and so on and so forth. Alliances depend on four main factors. One, the degree of commitment undertaken by members, the degree of integration in the alliance by members, the geographical spread of uh, uh, the alliance, and of course the scope of activities of the alliance. By the degree of commitment, it means the conditions under which the alliance will come into operation among members. Some members indicate that alliances will come into effect only if particular countries attack them or if any other country attack them whatsoever. A critical example was in the 19th century. In 1879, there was a dual alliance between Germany and Austria. The effect of this was that if Germany were attacked were to be at war with France, Austria would remain neutral, but if France was allied to any other country in the world, Austria would come to the assistance of Germany. This came to be the focus of this cooperation between the two countries. As the time progressed, this was expanded to accommodate other countries. Some alliances require that members simply come to the assistance of their alliance partners. Others require that they integrate their military forces so that in time of need, when the Casus Federis comes into being, they come as a single force to fight an external enemy. Alliance can depend on this. Alliance also can depend on whether uh, the blanket interests of members will be protected or whether it will be restricted to particular sphere of activities. Uh, During the Second World War, there was a related issue of whether the alliance between or among Britain, France, the United States, and the Allied forces will extend to the protection of the interests of the Allied forces in Europe and international relations or extend to their colonies. In the end, it was settled that it will only affect the metropolitan interests of the Allied forces. In others, it can extend to the protection of their colonies, but in this case, it was not the case. So alliances also depend on this. Um, Alliances, apart from extending uh, the defense capability, joining the forces of other powers to uh, member states, it also profit them by exchange of ideas, exchange of equipment. For example, in 1894, when France began the Franco-Russian alliance, uh, France obliged Russia to purchase armament, weapons, and military hardware from France. Russia in turn benefited from this. Some alliances come in this form of benefit. Alliances don't only profit members, it also has its own drawback. One, uh, by allying with other countries, members also inherit their liabilities. They make themselves enemies of the enemy of their alliance partner, even though their national interests may not necessarily conflict with such alliance partners' enemies. Also, alliances can motivate or inspire the formation of counter alliances, thereby creating tension within the international system. In the international system, from the end of the Second World War, alliances formed a major consideration in defense and strategy. The war was divided into two main alliance camps, namely the North Atlantic Treaty Organization camp and the Warsaw camp. And then there was a third group that called itself the Non-Allied Movement, made up of Africa, some southern some countries of the southern hemisphere which did not want to be affected by the politics of arms race and weapon rivalry that was raging on between uh, NATO and Warsaw Pact. So alliances came to be a major feature of uh, of the 20th century strategy and defense. Closely related to alliances is deterrence. Again, the concept of deterrence has been part and parcel of international relations from time immemorial. However, it assumed a new shade of meaning after the Second World War, with the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the Warsaw Pact. Deterrence has been expressed as a situation in which a powerful sword keeps the other in its sheath. In other words, it is a situation in which a would-be actor is restrained from acting in a particular way because of the threat of unacceptable consequences of such action by the recipient or victim of such an action. In other words, deterrence is to deter or to restrain or to prevent uh, an actor from acting in particular way and compel him to behave or act in a particular way because of the threat of consequences of its action that are not acceptable to it. In the 20th century, after the Second World War, the concept of deterrence became very prominent in international relations, in defense and strategy. With the formation of NATO, countries of Western Europe were assured that in case of any attack by the Soviet Union or countries in Eastern Europe, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance will come into operation. So that assurance more or less restrained any imperialistic ambition on the part of the Soviet Union or any country that would have wanted to attack the Western European countries. In a similar vein, countries of Eastern Europe were also protected by the Warsaw Pact. So a major feature of defense and strategy in the 20th century was the prevalence of alliances and their deterrent effect on countries in the international system. Uh, there have been several arguments as to whether alliances actually deter or invite attacks. Uh, Historical pieces of evidence can be adduced to support either of these arguments. But in the context of defense and strategy in the 20th century, we know that there was no war on the part of the members of the two alliance camps against one another. So we could say that alliances of the 20th century have had a deterrent effect on defense and strategy. I urge you to go and read more about alliances and deterrence. Thank you. I think it's not too long.